Everyone in the city knew about Isabella Grant, the wife of the millionaire businessman Richard Grant. She was the kind of woman people talked about in whispers, beautiful, powerful, and proud. Wherever she went, people looked at her with both admiration and fear. Her face was always perfect, her clothes always from the most expensive brands. She walked like she owned the world, and maybe, in a way, she did. Isabella lived a life most people could only dream about. She had mansions, luxury cars, and diamonds shining brighter than anyone else's. But behind all that glamour, there was a woman who believed she was above everyone. She didn't like being told no. And she didn't like being questioned. The people who worked for her husband's restaurant knew this very well. Richard Grant owned one of the most famous restaurants in the city. Rich families, celebrities, and politicians came there to dine every week. The restaurant was known for its elegance. Gold chandeliers, velvet curtains, and music that played softly in the background. But what really scared the employees wasn't the hard work or the demanding customers. It was Isabella Grant herself. Whenever Isabella entered the restaurant, the whole place changed. The laughter faded, the conversation stopped, and the staff stood straighter. Everyone knew her mood could decide someone's future. If she was happy, she might leave a big tip. But if something didn't please her, someone would lose their job. The manager, the chefs, and even the guards feared her temper. She would sit at her favorite corner table, always by the window, with a glass of red wine in her hand. Her eyes would scan every corner of the restaurant, looking for mistakes. If a fork wasn't polished enough, if a napkin wasn't folded perfectly, she'd snap her fingers and demand to see the one responsible. Her voice was calm but sharp, the kind that made your heart beat faster. "Do you call this service?" she would say with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "My husband pays you to make perfection, not excuses." The staff would bow their heads, mumble apologies, and rush to fix whatever she didn't like. Some employees had tried to complain before, but they never lasted long. The next morning, they would find a note saying their services were no longer needed. No one knew how Isabella had so much power. Some said she had control over her husband's business decisions. Others believed Richard was too afraid to stand against her. Richard Grant, though a kind man, had learned to stay quiet. He loved peace, not confrontation, and Isabella always got her way. When she shouted, he stayed silent. When she demanded, he agreed. People often wondered if the millionaire owned the business, or if his wife owned him. To outsiders, Isabella looked like the perfect lady. Graceful, elegant, charming. She smiled at the cameras and gave expensive donations to charities. Her face appeared in magazines. Her words quoted as inspiration for high society women. But the workers saw a different side of her. They saw the arrogance, the impatience, and the cruel pleasure she took in reminding them of their place. There was one time a waiter accidentally spilled a few drops of water on her expensive dress. The boy couldn't have been older than 20. His hands trembled as he apologized, but Isabella stood up slowly, her voice cold. "You should find another job before you ruin someone else's evening." The manager begged her to forgive him, but she refused. The boy was fired that same night. After that, no one dared to make a mistake again. People walked on eggshells around her. Every movement, every word, was careful and calculated. Even when she wasn't around, her presence haunted the staff. They whispered her name like she was a ghost that could appear any time. Some workers tried to understand her. Maybe she acted like that because she was lonely, or maybe her wealth had made her forget what kindness felt like. But no one ever dared to ask. No one had the courage to look directly into her eyes. There was a strange mix of beauty and coldness in them, like ice wrapped in silk. Yet behind her confidence, there was a kind of emptiness that no one noticed. Isabella had everything: money, beauty, status, but she didn't have respect. People obeyed her, but not because they admired her. They obeyed because they were afraid, and fear, though powerful, never lasts forever. She believed her power was untouchable, that no one could ever stand up to her. But fate had a strange way of teaching lessons. Soon, a new face would walk into that restaurant. Someone simple, kind, and unknown. Someone who would unknowingly challenge everything Isabella believed about power and respect. That person would not come from wealth or fame. She wouldn't have diamonds or designer dresses. But she would have something Isabella lacked: humility, strength, and quiet confidence. And without even trying, she would become the mirror Isabella had avoided her whole life. For now, though, Isabella Grant continued to live in her world of control. Every morning she looked into the mirror and smiled at her reflection. She saw a woman who ruled over everyone. She didn't know that soon, everything she thought she controlled would begin to crumble. Not because of money, not because of scandal, but because of a waitress. An ordinary girl with an extraordinary heart. And while the city still whispered her name in fear, destiny was quietly writing the moment that would change Isabella's life forever. It was a cloudy evening when a young woman named Lena Parker walked into Grant's restaurant for her first day of work. The air smelled of roasted steak and expensive wine, and the sound of soft piano music floated through the place. Lena looked around with wide eyes, amazed by the chandeliers and golden lights that sparkled above her. Everything seemed elegant, but also a little frightening. She had never worked anywhere so fancy before. Lena was 22, slim, with brown hair tied neatly into a bun. Her uniform was slightly loose, and her shoes were worn out, but her smile was warm, the kind that made people feel comfortable instantly. She had come from a small town outside the city, leaving behind a sick mother and a younger brother. Her mother had been fighting illness for months, and hospital bills were piling up. Lena needed this job more than anything. The restaurant manager, Mr. Cole, was a serious-looking man with silver hair. He handed her a tray and said, "This is not an easy place to work. The customers are rich, and they expect perfection, especially Mrs. Grant, the owner's wife. She can be difficult." He paused, choosing his words carefully, then added, "If she comes in, just stay quiet and do as you're told." Lena nodded politely. "I'll do my best, sir," she said with confidence. She wasn't the kind of girl who got scared easily. Life had already taught her to be patient and calm. She had dealt with rude customers before in the small diner she used to work at, but something about the way the staff spoke of Mrs. Grant made her curious. As she began her first shift, Lena noticed the other waiters moving quickly, almost nervously. They whispered warnings to her. "Whatever happens, don't make eye contact with Mrs. Grant," one said. "If she complains about anything, just apologize, even if it's not your fault," added another. She smiled softly and replied, "Thank you, I'll remember that." Though she didn't fully understand why one woman could make so many people so scared, Lena started learning the menu. Expensive dishes she had never seen before, truffle pasta, lobster tail, wagyu steak. Every plate had to be arranged perfectly. The cutlery had to shine like silver mirrors. She made small mistakes at first, like placing a spoon slightly off-center or forgetting to refill a water glass. But instead of getting angry, the manager just sighed and said, "You'll learn quickly, I can tell." As the night went on, customers smiled at her politeness and gentle tone. Some even gave her compliments. "You're new, aren't you?" one woman asked kindly. "You'll do well here, dear." Lena thanked her and carried on serving. But even as the night went smoothly, the older waiters kept glancing at the door, like they were expecting a storm. Lena finally asked one of them, "Why is everyone so nervous?" The waiter whispered, "Because when Mrs. Isabella Grant walks in, everything changes." He didn't explain further, but the fear in his eyes said enough. When her shift ended, Lena sat in the staff room, her feet aching but her spirit still high. She pulled out a small photo of her mother from her pocket, smiling at it softly. "I did it, Mom," she whispered. "I got through my first day." The next morning, she returned to work with renewed energy. The staff had already started preparing for the evening rush. Mr. Cole told her, "Mrs. Grant might come tonight. Be careful, and don't say anything unless spoken to." Lena just nodded, though inside, she wondered what kind of person could cause so much fear. Later that evening, the restaurant filled with the usual crowd. Businessmen in suits, couples in elegant dresses, and waiters rushing silently between tables. Lena was carrying a tray of drinks when she felt the air shift. It was strange, but she could feel everyone suddenly tense up. The piano player's hands slowed, conversations softened, even the manager straightened his tie nervously. Then she saw her, Isabella Grant, walking through the door in a white designer gown, diamonds glittering around her neck. Her heels clicked sharply on the marble floor. Her expression was cold, confident, and unreadable. The entire staff stopped moving for a moment. Lena blinked, a little surprised. The woman looked exactly as people had described. Beautiful but intimidating, Isabella's eyes scanned the restaurant until they landed on Lena for a brief second. Then she looked away, as if the young waitress wasn't even worth noticing. Lena continued serving quietly, doing her best to stay invisible. She saw how Isabella waved her hand and waiters rushed to obey her without question. She complained about the lighting, the temperature, even the way the napkins were folded, and yet, everyone smiled and agreed with her every word. It was almost painful for Lena to watch. She didn't understand how people could be so afraid of someone who just seemed angry at the world. But she stayed polite, careful, and silent. Her mother had always told her, "Kindness doesn't make you weak. It makes you stronger than those who hurt others." So she held her head high and kept working. When the night ended, a few workers whispered near the staff door. "The new girl did well," said one. "She didn't shake when Mrs. Grant looked at her," said another. Lena smiled faintly, not realizing that her calmness had already caught Isabella's attention. That night, as Isabella left the restaurant, her eyes once again fell on Lena, just for a second. She didn't say anything, but something about the girl's quiet composure made her uneasy. It was as if she sensed that Lena was different. Not scared, not desperate to impress, just quietly strong. And while everyone around her continued to bow and obey, that one small moment planted a spark of tension that would soon grow into something much bigger. Lena Parker, the new waitress no one noticed at first, was about to become the one person Isabella Grant could never forget. Even fate seemed to be watching, waiting for the day when the powerful millionaire's wife and the humble waitress would collide in a way that would change both their lives forever. It was Lena's third day at Grant's restaurant. The evening crowd had started filling the tables, and the air buzzed with soft chatter and the clinking of glasses. The smell of roasted garlic and sizzling steak drifted through the room. Lena moved quickly but gracefully, carrying trays, refilling water, and smiling politely at customers. She was starting to feel a little confident, thinking she was getting used to this new job, but what she didn't know was that tonight would change everything. Around 7 o'clock, the door opened and a sudden hush spread across the restaurant. It was like the air itself grew heavy. Every waiter froze. The pianist's hands paused for a brief second before continuing a shaky tune. Lena turned to look, and there she was, Isabella Grant. Isabella stepped into the restaurant like a queen entering her palace. Her long black dress shimmered under the golden lights, and her diamond earrings sparkled with every step she took. Behind her walked two assistants, one carrying her purse, another holding her phone. Her sharp perfume filled the air. Everyone bowed slightly, whispering greetings. "Good evening, Mrs. Grant." She didn't reply, only nodded slightly. Her eyes scanned the restaurant, looking for anything out of place. A single frown from her was enough to send the staff into panic. She finally sat at her favorite table near the window, the one with the red roses and the view of the city lights. Lena had heard about this woman so many times that seeing her in real life felt strange. Isabella looked perfect, too perfect, like someone carved from marble, cold and untouchable. But Lena noticed something else too. There was a deep emptiness behind those beautiful eyes. "Lena," whispered the manager nervously. "Mrs. Grant is here. Be very careful. Serve the other tables quietly and don't draw attention." Lena nodded. "Yes, sir," she said softly and continued her work. For a while, everything went smoothly. The waiters moved fast, making sure Isabella had everything before she even asked. One poured her wine. Another brought her favorite steak exactly the way she liked it, medium rare. Everything had to be flawless, because one small mistake could ruin someone's career. Then it happened. While Lena was serving a family at the next table, Isabella called out sharply, snapping her fingers. "You there, new girl," she said. Her voice was calm but carried an icy tone that made the room silent. Lena turned around, her heart beating a little faster. "Yes, ma'am?" she asked politely, walking over. Isabella looked her up and down. "You're new here, aren't you?" "Yes, Mrs. Grant, just started this week." Lena replied with a polite smile. Isabella said, taking a slow sip of her wine. "You're too slow. I saw you serve that table, and you looked clumsy. We don't tolerate mistakes here." Lena felt her cheeks warm, but she kept her voice calm. "I'm sorry if I seemed slow, ma'am. I'll try to do better." For a second, Isabella just stared at her, waiting for fear, waiting for her to stammer or look away. But Lena didn't. Her eyes were respectful, not scared. Her tone was polite, not desperate. That small act of calmness unsettled Isabella more than any apology could have. Around them, everyone pretended not to listen. But every ear was tuned in. The kitchen door stopped swinging, and even the bartender leaned closer. The staff knew this was dangerous. One wrong word, and the new waitress could be gone by tomorrow. Isabella leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Do you know who I am?" she asked coldly. Lena nodded. "Yes, ma'am. You're Mrs. Grant, the owner's wife." "Then you should know what I expect," Isabella replied, her lips curling into a half-smile. "Perfection, nothing less." "I understand, ma'am," Lena said softly. "I'll keep that in mind." For some reason, that calm, steady voice irritated Isabella. She wasn't used to people answering her without trembling. Usually, staff would rush to please her, beg for forgiveness, and look at the floor, but this young waitress. She didn't challenge her. Yet she didn't break either. Isabella picked up her napkin and said in a tone dripping with sarcasm, "I hope your work improves. I'd hate to see someone lose their job so early." Lena just nodded. "Thank you for the advice, ma'am," and walked away quietly. The room stayed silent for a moment. Then slowly, conversations began again. The waiters exchanged nervous glances. Everyone was surprised. Lena had survived a direct conversation with Isabella Grant, and she hadn't been fired. In the kitchen, the staff whispered about what happened. "She didn't even flinch," one said. "That new girl has courage." Another replied, Mr. Cole, the manager, sighed in relief. "Let's just hope Mrs. Grant forgets about it," he muttered. But Isabella didn't forget. As she finished her meal, she kept glancing at Lena from across the room, watching how she smiled at customers, how she carefully served food without rushing. There was something about her calmness that felt different, unsettling even. When Isabella finally stood up to leave, she walked past Lena's table deliberately, her heels clicking on the floor like a warning. She stopped for a brief moment and said, "You have potential, Miss Parker. Don't waste it." Her words sounded kind, but the tone carried hidden meaning. A test? A challenge? Lena bowed her head slightly. "Thank you, Mrs. Grant," she replied, her voice steady. As Isabella walked out, the air in the restaurant relaxed. People sighed quietly, the tension melting away. The piano music grew softer again. Lena exhaled deeply, realizing her hands were slightly shaking, not from fear, but from the pressure of the moment. Still, she smiled to herself. She had faced the woman everyone feared, and survived without losing her dignity. What Lena didn't know was that this small interaction had already caught Isabella's full attention. To Isabella, this waitress was different. Too calm, too composed, and far too confident for someone from such a humble background. From that night, something inside Isabella began to stir. Curiosity mixed with irritation. She didn't know it yet, but this simple waitress would soon become the mirror that showed her who she truly was. And for the first time in years, the untouchable Isabella Grant felt something new. The beginning of change. The next few days at Grant's restaurant went on quietly, but the air still carried the memory of that tense moment between Isabella and Lena. Everyone had seen how calmly the new waitress handled the powerful millionaire's wife, and though no one said it out loud, there was a quiet sense of admiration for her. Lena herself didn't think much about it. She was just happy to be doing her job well and sending money home to her sick mother. But for Isabella Grant, the incident kept replaying in her mind. She couldn't understand why that one young waitress had stayed so calm in front of her. Usually, people trembled, begged, or looked away. But Lena hadn't done any of that. She had looked at Isabella with polite respect. Not fear, not pride, just quiet strength, and that, somehow, bothered Isabella more than open disobedience would have. A few evenings later, the restaurant was packed with customers. The sound of laughter and the smell of expensive dishes filled the air. The waiters rushed between tables, careful not to bump into anyone. Isabella entered again, this time dressed in a dark green gown that shimmered like an emerald under the lights. As always, the restaurant froze the moment she appeared. The manager hurried to greet her, and everyone straightened up instantly. She sat at her favorite table by the window, her heels clicking sharply as she crossed her legs. Her diamond bracelet glimmered when she lifted her wine glass, and her cold eyes scanned the restaurant like a queen inspecting her kingdom. Her gaze finally landed on Lena, who was serving at the far end of the hall. "Ah, the new girl," Isabella murmured softly, a faint smirk appearing on her face. She had been thinking about her since that last encounter, and now, she felt the urge to remind everyone who held the power here. After a few minutes, Isabella raised her hand, and her assistant whispered something to the manager. Within seconds, Mr. Cole hurried over to Lena. "Mrs. Grant has requested you to serve her table tonight," he said nervously. Lena hesitated for a second but then nodded. "Of course, sir." She took a deep breath, fixed her uniform, and walked toward Isabella's table with the calmest smile she could manage. The other waiters watched anxiously, whispering among themselves. "Why did she call her again?" one asked. "Maybe she's going to test her," another replied. Lena reached the table and greeted politely. "Good evening, Mrs. Grant. What would you like to have tonight?" Isabella didn't answer immediately. She stared at Lena for a moment, her lips curling slightly. "You're polite," she said finally. "That's good. But let's see if you can also be quick." Lena nodded and waited patiently. Isabella opened the menu slowly, as if to make her wait longer. "I'll have the steak, medium rare, and make sure it's perfect this time," she said sharply. "Last time, it was slightly overcooked. I don't like mistakes." "I'll make sure it's perfect, ma'am," Lena replied softly and left for the kitchen. As the chefs prepared the order, the rest of the staff kept glancing toward Isabella's table. They all knew what was coming. The woman always found something to complain about. It was her way of proving that no one could please her. When Lena finally returned with the steak on a polished silver plate, Isabella's eyes were already fixed on her like a hawk. She set the plate down carefully, making sure everything looked right, but Isabella barely glanced at the food. Instead, she picked up her fork and deliberately let it fall to the floor. The soft clang echoed in the quiet restaurant. Lena blinked, confused for a second. Before she could react, Isabella said coldly, "Pick it up." The room went completely silent. All eyes turned toward them. The waiters froze mid-step, and even the customers pretended not to look while still watching closely. Lena looked at the fork on the ground, then at Isabella, who was watching her with that same smug, challenging expression. For a brief moment, it felt like time had stopped. Lena understood what was happening. This wasn't about the fork. It was a test or maybe an attempt to humiliate her. Without saying a word, Lena slowly bent down and picked up the fork. Her movements were calm and graceful. She didn't look angry. She didn't look ashamed. Instead, she gently placed the fork back on the table, cleaned it with a napkin, and said in a soft but steady voice, "Even the richest hands can drop things sometimes." The words were quiet, but everyone around heard them. Isabella froze for a second, not expecting that answer. There was no rudeness in Lena's tone, just simple truth spoken with kindness. A few waiters turned away quickly, trying to hide their surprised smiles. For a moment, Isabella didn't know what to say. Her face stiffened, her jaw tightened, and her pride flared up, but at the same time, something deep inside her felt a strange sting. Embarrassment, mixed with the sharp realization that she might have gone too far. "Go," she said finally, waving her hand. "You may leave." Her voice was firm, but her confidence seemed slightly cracked. Lena bowed her head respectfully. "Yes, ma'am," she replied, and walked away quietly. Her heart was pounding, but she kept her calm until she reached the kitchen. The staff looked at her with wide eyes. "You said that to Mrs. Grant?" one whispered. "You're brave or crazy," said another. Lena just smiled faintly and went back to work, trying not to think too much about it. She hadn't meant to challenge Isabella. She had only spoken honestly. Meanwhile, Isabella sat at her table, her mind racing. The sound of her own heartbeat seemed louder than the soft piano music. She picked up her wine glass, her hands slightly trembling. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to her without fear, and it had left her speechless. As she left the restaurant that night, Isabella didn't speak to anyone. Her assistants followed silently, unsure what had just happened. But deep down, Isabella knew one thing. That young waitress had made her feel small in front of everyone. Not with anger, not with arrogance, but with grace. And though she would never admit it out loud, Isabella Grant felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. respect, mixed with a strange kind of envy. It was the beginning of a change she didn't see coming. A change brought on by a simple, kind-hearted waitress who refused to lose her dignity. That night, after the restaurant closed, everyone was still talking about what had happened between Isabella and Lena. The story spread quietly among the staff like wildfire. Some couldn't believe Lena had spoken so calmly after being humiliated. Others admired her courage. She didn't even raise her voice, one waiter said. She just smiled and spoke like a queen herself, whispered another. But while everyone was whispering in the kitchen, something else was happening upstairs, in the Grant family's luxurious penthouse above the restaurant. Richard Grant sat in his office, looking over business papers. He was a quiet, kind man in his 50s, respected by many. But behind that calm smile was a husband who had learned to live in the shadow of his wife's strong personality. When Isabella walked into the room, Richard could tell something was off. Her usual proud expression was gone, replaced by silent anger. She poured herself a drink and stared out of the window. "You're quiet tonight," Richard said carefully. "Did something happen at the restaurant?" Isabella's jaw tightened. She didn't want to talk about it, but her pride forced her to speak. "That new waitress?" she said coldly. "Lena Parker. She's disrespectful." Richard looked up from his papers, surprised. "Disrespectful? That doesn't sound like her. She's new." "Yes, but I've heard good things, the customers like her." Isabella turned to him sharply. "You're defending her? You didn't even see how she spoke to me. She tried to make me look foolish in front of everyone." Richard frowned. "What exactly did she say?" Isabella hesitated, remembering the words that still echoed in her head. "Even the richest hands can drop things sometimes." She repeated them bitterly. Richard was silent for a moment, then a small, thoughtful smile appeared on his face. "That doesn't sound rude to me," he said gently. "It sounds like she spoke with manners, maybe even kindness." Isabella's eyes narrowed. "You're missing the point, Richard. She embarrassed me in front of your staff. That girl needs to be fired." Richard sighed, rubbing his temples. He knew his wife's temper too well. She had fired many employees before. Some for real mistakes, others just because she felt disrespected. But this time felt different. "I'll look into it," he said finally, trying to calm her down. The next morning, before opening hours, Richard went to the restaurant early. He called the manager, Mr. Cole, and asked for the security footage from the previous night. He watched silently as the video played, showing every detail. Isabella dropping the fork, Lena bending to pick it up, and then those few calm words that silenced the room. Richard leaned back in his chair, thinking deeply. There was no trace of rudeness in Lena's voice, only calm strength. He smiled faintly. She handled that better than most people would, he murmured to himself. Later that day, when Lena arrived for her shift, she was surprised to see Mr. Grant waiting for her. He greeted her kindly. "Miss Parker, could I have a word with you?" Her heart raced. She thought she might be in trouble, but she nodded politely. "Of course, sir." They stepped into his office, and Richard gestured for her to sit. "I heard about what happened last night," he began gently. "Mrs. Grant believes you were rude, but after watching the video, I saw something different." Lena's eyes widened. "Sir, I didn't mean to be disrespectful. I only—" Richard raised a hand, stopping her. "You don't have to explain. I saw everything. You handled the situation with grace and patience. That's something rare." Lena felt relief wash over her. She smiled softly. "Thank you, sir. I'm just trying to do my job." Richard nodded. "And you're doing it very well. Don't let anyone make you doubt your worth," he said kindly. "If you ever feel uncomfortable, you can come to me directly." Lena was touched by his words. She didn't know how to thank him. "That means a lot, sir," she said quietly. After she left, Richard sat alone, thinking about his wife. He knew Isabella wasn't a bad person deep down, but her pride had built a wall between her and the rest of the world, and for the first time in years, someone had made a small crack in that wall. Not with anger, but with kindness. When Isabella came to the restaurant later that evening, she noticed the way Richard looked at Lena as she served customers. Not in a personal way, but with respect. She didn't like it. It made her feel threatened, like her control was slipping. At dinner, Richard tried to talk to her. "Isabella," he said gently. "You know, that young waitress didn't mean to hurt your pride. Maybe you should give her another chance." She frowned, stabbing her fork into her food. "You're taking her side." "I'm not taking sides," Richard replied calmly. "I'm just saying, maybe there's a lesson in this for both of us." She looked up sharply. "A lesson? What could I possibly learn from a waitress?" Richard sighed. "Maybe that respect isn't demanded. It's earned." His tone was gentle but firm. Those words hit Isabella harder than she expected. She didn't respond, just went quiet for the rest of the meal. But deep inside, something began to stir. A small, uncomfortable awareness that her husband might be right. Meanwhile, Lena continued working with her usual kindness. She never mentioned what happened, never boasted or complained. She just did her job and treated everyone with the same gentle smile. The customers noticed, and soon, some of the regulars even started asking for her by name. One evening, as Lena walked home after her shift, she passed by a bookstore window and saw her reflection in the glass. She smiled softly, not realizing how much she had already changed the world around her. With nothing but honesty and humility, she had gained the respect even money couldn't buy. Back at the Grant mansion, Isabella sat alone in her room, looking out the window at the city lights. She kept hearing Lena's words in her mind. Even the richest hands can drop things sometimes. For the first time, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she had been the one making mistakes all along. It was a thought she tried to push away, but it stayed with her, quietly growing, like a seed waiting for the right moment to bloom, and soon, that moment would come, in a way she never expected. A few days passed after the tense dinner between Richard and Isabella. The restaurant continued to run smoothly, and Lena's presence made it even better. Customers loved her polite attitude and genuine smile. The staff began to notice that business was picking up. People seemed to enjoy dining there more, but Isabella hadn't been back since the incident. She stayed away, perhaps still angry, or maybe unsure how to face everyone. One morning, Richard asked Isabella to join him for breakfast, hoping they could talk calmly. She agreed, but her tone was still cold. "I don't see why you keep bringing up that waitress," she said. "It's such a small thing." Richard smiled patiently. "It's not about her, Isabella. It's about how you treat people. You have a good heart, but sometimes your pride gets in the way." She rolled her eyes. "You sound like that girl now. What's next? Should I apologize to her?" He looked at her seriously. "Maybe you should." That shocked Isabella. No one had ever said that to her. Everyone always agreed with her, or at least pretended to. "You expect me, the owner's wife, to apologize to a waitress?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. Richard didn't argue. He simply said, "I expect you to be fair, that's all," and left the table, leaving her in silence. For the next few days, Isabella couldn't stop thinking about it. She remembered how calm and confident Lena had looked, even after being insulted. It annoyed her, but deep down, she also admired it. There was something different about that girl, something she couldn't quite explain. One afternoon, Isabella decided to visit the restaurant quietly. She didn't want to make a scene. She wore sunglasses and a simple dress, trying not to attract attention. When she entered, Lena was busy serving a family at one of the corner tables. She smiled warmly, making the children laugh. Isabella watched from afar, unnoticed. When Lena turned to take an order, she accidentally bumped into a tray carried by another waiter. A glass fell, spilling water onto the floor. Before anyone could react, Lena quickly knelt down, cleaned it up, and apologized with a soft laugh. "It's okay. Everyone makes mistakes," she said kindly to the waiter, who looked nervous. That small moment hit Isabella deeply. The same kind of accident that once made her explode in anger. This girl handled with grace. No blame, no shouting. Just calm understanding. Isabella suddenly realized how differently she behaved in similar situations. She took a deep breath and decided to stay a little longer. Watching Lena work, the more she watched, the more she noticed how people gravitated toward her kindness. Customers seemed happier, the staff worked better together, and even the atmosphere of the place felt lighter. When the rush slowed down, Isabella finally approached the counter. Lena looked up and froze for a moment when she saw her. The woman who once humiliated her was standing just a few steps away. Mrs. Grant? Lena greeted politely, keeping her voice steady. Good afternoon. Isabella hesitated, her pride fighting with her guilt. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then, in a quiet voice, Isabella said, Can we talk for a moment? Lena nodded, leading her to a quieter corner of the restaurant. I came here today not as the owner's wife, Isabella began, choosing her words carefully, but as a person who might have been wrong. Lena blinked, surprised. Wrong, ma'am. Yes, Isabella said, looking down slightly. I was rude to you that night. I judged you without reason, and I made a scene in front of everyone that wasn't fair. Lena was silent, not knowing what to say. She never expected an apology, especially not from someone like Isabella. I watched you today, Isabella continued. You have something I lost a long time ago. Patience. You make people feel respected, even when they make mistakes. That's rare. Lena smiled softly. Thank you, ma'am. I just try to treat people how I'd want to be treated. Isabella nodded slowly, her voice softening. It shows. You've taught me something I should have known long ago. Money can buy comfort, but not respect. There was a pause. Not an awkward one, but a meaningful one. For the first time, Isabella felt lighter, like a heavy burden had been lifted. I'm sorry, she said again. And thank you for reminding me what kindness looks like. Lena smiled warmly. It's all right, ma'am. We all have our moments. What matters is what we learn from them. Those words stayed with Isabella long after she left the restaurant. When she got home, Richard noticed something different about her. Her eyes looked softer, her tone gentler. He smiled knowingly. You went to see her, didn't you? She nodded. Yes, and you were right. She's special. I don't know how one young woman could change so much just by being herself. Richard laughed quietly. Sometimes it doesn't take power to change people, just honesty. That night, Isabella sat by the window, thinking about her life. For years, people had feared her, her temper, her wealth, her influence. But now, for the first time, someone had made her think about being respected, not feared. She realized she didn't want to be the untouchable wife anymore. She wanted to be someone her husband could be proud of, someone people could approach without fear. And all it took was one brave waitress with a kind heart to remind her of that truth. As she lay down to sleep, a peaceful smile appeared on her face. The lesson was simple yet powerful. Kindness doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. And sometimes, it's the smallest person in the room who ends up teaching the biggest lesson of all. The next few weeks brought a quiet but beautiful change in Isabella Grant. The woman who once entered the restaurant like a storm now walked in with calm steps and a gentle smile. The staff couldn't believe it at first. They whispered to each other, thinking maybe it wouldn't last, but it did. Lena continued to work just as she always had, never showing pride for what had happened. To her, Isabella's apology wasn't a victory. It was a moment of humanity. She treated Mrs. Grant with the same kindness she gave everyone else. And that made Isabella respect her even more. One morning, Richard invited Lena to his office. He greeted her warmly. Lena, I wanted to thank you personally, he said. You've done more than just serve customers here. You've changed the way this place feels. Lena smiled shyly. I didn't do much, sir. I just tried to do my job. Richard shook his head. No, you did something rare. You helped someone remember what really matters. He paused for a moment, then added, I'd like to promote you to head waitress. Lena's eyes widened in surprise. Me? But there are others who've been here longer. He smiled. Yes, but none of them showed the heart and patience you did. I think you'll be perfect for this role. Lena felt tears in her eyes. Thank you, sir. I'll do my best. When Isabella heard about the promotion, she didn't object. In fact, she was secretly proud of Lena. Later that evening, she went to the restaurant with a bouquet of flowers. The entire staff froze when they saw her carrying them. Lena looked confused. Ma'am? She said softly. Isabella smiled. These are for you, Lena. Congratulations. The whole team stood still, shocked. The once feared millionaire's wife handing flowers to a waitress. It was a moment no one would forget. Lena blushed and accepted them with both hands. Thank you, ma'am. That means a lot. Isabella nodded. You deserve it. You've reminded me that respect has to be shared, not demanded. From that day on, Isabella began visiting the restaurant more often, but not to inspect or command. She started helping with small things. Greeting guests, talking to the staff kindly, and even tasting dishes with a smile instead of criticism. People noticed, and slowly, her image began to change. Even outside the restaurant, she started doing charity work again. Something she hadn't done in years. She visited orphanages, helped women start small businesses, and donated food to shelters. The media picked up on it, calling it the new Isabella Grant. But deep down, she didn't care about headlines anymore. She just wanted to be better. One evening, after closing time, Lena was cleaning up when Isabella came over with 2 cups of tea. Mind if I join you? She asked. Lena smiled. Of course not, ma'am. They sat together near the counter, the lights dim and the city glowing outside the window. For a few minutes, they just sat quietly. Then Isabella spoke softly. You know, people used to fear me. I thought that was power, but now I see it was loneliness. Lena looked at her kindly. Sometimes we build walls around ourselves without realizing it. Ma'am, it feels safe, but it keeps good people away too. Isabella nodded, taking a sip of her tea. You're wiser than you look, Lena. You've taught me something no amount of money could buy. Lena smiled gently. You taught yourself, ma'am. I just reminded you. They both laughed softly, a sound that felt warm and natural. For Isabella, it was the first time in years that she felt truly at peace sitting beside someone who wasn't rich or powerful. Just kind. When Richard came downstairs and saw them talking like old friends, he smiled quietly and didn't interrupt. He knew his wife had finally changed, not because someone forced her to, but because someone helped her see the world differently. The next day, Isabella made an announcement at the restaurant. She gathered all the staff and said, From now on, I want this place to be more than a restaurant. I want it to be a family, where everyone feels respected, no matter their job. Her words touched everyone. Some of the older waiters even teared up, remembering how scared they used to be around her. Now she was smiling at them, thanking them for their hard work. Lena stood at the back, clapping quietly. Her eyes glowed with pride. Not for herself, but for the woman Isabella had become. Later, when the restaurant was quiet again, Isabella approached her. Lena, I've been thinking of starting a charity foundation for women who've lost their confidence. I'd like you to help me run it. Lena was stunned. Me? But I've never done something like that. Isabella smiled warmly. That's exactly why you should. You have the heart for it, and I trust you. Lena's voice shook slightly. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Isabella said with a grin. And we'll figure out the rest together. Tears filled Lena's eyes as she nodded. Yes, ma'am. I'd be honored. That evening, as Isabella drove home, she looked out at the city lights and thought about how much her life had changed. A few months ago, she was a woman everyone feared. Cold, powerful, and alone. Now, she was surrounded by respect, kindness, and genuine happiness. Richard took her hand and smiled. You look happier these days. She smiled back softly. I am. It's strange. I used to think power was everything, but it turns out kindness is stronger. He squeezed her hand gently. Told you that girl would teach us something? Isabella laughed quietly. Yes, she really did. And as they drove through the quiet streets, Isabella knew one thing for sure. Sometimes the greatest lessons in life come from the most unexpected people. The waitress she once looked down on had not only changed her restaurant, but had changed her heart forever. Months passed, and life at the Grant restaurant completely changed. The air that was once filled with tension and fear now felt warm and welcoming. Customers could sense it too. Laughter echoed. The staff worked happily, and everyone seemed proud to be part of something special. And at the heart of it all was Lena, the young waitress who had unknowingly started this transformation. Lena's promotion to head waitress had brought her new responsibilities, but she handled them with the same humility she always had. She trained new staff members, encouraged them when they made mistakes, and treated everyone equally. Under her gentle guidance, the team grew stronger and more confident. One evening, a large event was planned at the restaurant. The Grant Foundation's charity dinner. It was Isabella's idea, her first big project since changing her ways. The event's goal was to raise money for women who had lost jobs or suffered abuse. Isabella wanted to give them a chance to start over, just like she had. The restaurant was decorated beautifully, soft golden lights glowing over the tables, and elegant flowers placed at every corner. The staff worked together perfectly, and Lena, in her new uniform, made sure everything went smoothly. As the guests began to arrive, Isabella welcomed them with genuine warmth. Gone was the cold, proud expression she once wore. Now her smile was real, her words kind. She personally greeted every guest and even thanked the staff, something no one had ever imagined she would do. Richard watched her from across the room, pride shining in his eyes. He leaned toward one of the guests and said softly, "That's my wife, the real her." When Lena approached to check if everything was all right, Isabella smiled. "You've done an amazing job, Lena. I couldn't have done this without you." Lena blushed slightly. "You've done so much, ma'am. I'm just happy to be part of it." Before Isabella could reply, a reporter approached her, asking for an interview. The cameras rolled as Isabella spoke confidently about her new foundation. "This isn't just about charity," she said. "It's about giving back dignity to those who've been overlooked. Everyone deserves respect, no matter their background." Her words touched everyone, including Lena, who listened quietly from the side. She couldn't help but smile, remembering the night Isabella had once insulted her. It felt like a lifetime ago. After the speech, applause filled the restaurant, but just then, something unexpected happened. A woman from the audience stood up. She looked nervous but determined. "Mrs. Grant," she said, "I'm one of the women your foundation helped. I just wanted to thank you." The room went silent as the woman continued. "A few months ago, I had nothing, but because of your support, I started a small bakery, and it's doing well now. You gave me hope again." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. She stepped forward and hugged the woman tightly. "No, you gave yourself hope," she said softly. "I just opened a door." The audience clapped again, louder this time. Richard's eyes were wet too, and Lena couldn't stop smiling. It was one of those moments that reminded everyone that kindness had the power to heal more than money ever could. After the event ended, the restaurant was quiet again. The staff were cleaning up, tired but happy. Isabella stayed behind to help them pick up plates and wipe tables. Lena looked at her in surprise. "Ma'am, you don't have to do that?" Isabella laughed lightly. "Oh, I do. I made enough messes in this place. It's time I clean a few." Lena laughed too, and for a moment, they were just two women working side by side, no differences between them. As they finished cleaning, Isabella sat down at a corner table, looking thoughtful. "You know, Lena," she said softly, "I used to think people respected me because of my name or money, but they were just afraid of me. Now, for the first time, I feel truly respected, and I owe that to you." Lena shook her head. "No, ma'am. You changed because you wanted to. I just happened to be there." Isabella smiled. "You're humble, and that's what makes you strong. Promise me you'll never lose that, no matter how far you go." Lena nodded with a small smile. "I promise." Later that night, Richard joined them. "Ladies," he said playfully, "I think it's time we all go home. We've changed the world enough for one day." They all laughed, and as they stepped outside, a gentle breeze blew through the city. The stars sparkled above, and the sound of distant traffic hummed softly in the background. Standing there under the night sky, Isabella looked at Lena and said, "You know, if someone had told me a year ago that a waitress would change my life, I would have laughed." Lena chuckled. "Life surprises us, ma'am." "Yes, it does," Isabella replied. "And sometimes the smallest people make the biggest difference." Months later, the Grant Foundation grew into something even larger, helping hundreds of women across the city. Lena became one of its directors, working side by side with Isabella to make real change happen. They weren't just boss and employee anymore. They were friends, connected by the lessons they had learned together. Isabella was no longer feared. She was respected and admired for her generosity and warmth. People now looked up to her not because of her wealth, but because of her heart. And whenever someone asked her how she changed, she always gave the same answer. "A waitress taught me what true grace looks like." As for Lena, She continued to live simply, still helping others whenever she could. She never let success change her. Her kindness remained her strength, and everyone who met her left feeling a little lighter, a little more hopeful. In the end, their story became something of a legend in the city. A reminder that one act of humility can turn pride into compassion, and fear into love. The millionaire's wife who once ruled through power had learned the greatest truth of all. Respect isn't commanded, it's earned through kindness. And the waitress who had once been invisible had become the light that showed everyone the way. Their paths had crossed by chance, but what they created together became a story of change, forgiveness, and humanity. A story that would be remembered for years to come,